And on that note, I'll hand it over to Joe from Ignitho, and I think Joe is going to pick up on particularly those themes of partnership between West and emerging and large and small. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Joe.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. So I'm carrying on from where Jaideep left. So as you know, Jaideep comes from an academic background, spoken about some of the concepts that's there. And before I start my presentation, I'll talk a bit about how did we get to what we are doing today, right? So, and I think there is an angle to my background on how we got to Ignitho, right? So my background, I spent about 15 years working in large IT services firms. What we would typically do is work with large corporates and run large programs. So let's say a large airline wants to create a new ticketing system. We would build those systems for them. And traditionally what is called as IT outsourcing is what the space that we came from. Over the years, as we started to help a lot of these large corporates, one of the trends we started to see was a lot of them were interested in trying to do new stuff, right? There are a lot of ideas sitting within a lot of these entities, but there was no way to kind of really create it, right? And at the same time, people like Jaideep are talking about, a huge movement towards interest in innovation, right? And a lot of these connects we had in the corporate world, typically these would be more tech-oriented folks. They would come back and say that, hey, you know what, we are also interested to pick up some of these ideas from the business or from the organization to kind of progress that into kind of something that we can showcase to the business, right? And a lot of what I'm going to cover is about taking some of these concepts and creating it something that's physically visible to people, especially when you talk about innovation, right? If you say, I'm trying to create, let's say, something around solving a online payment, right? You can always create a lot of slides and say, this is how it's all going to work. Or one could actually create something and showcasing that this is how it's all going to work, right? So download it on your mobile app, see how it can work, right? So that's one side of the story. So there was, we felt a pent-up demand in the market, especially with organizations in the Western market to try to create innovation with not large budgets, right? And the gap clearly was a lot of these large IT services companies wouldn't touch anything that was less than $1 million in revenue, right? So if a corporate had 50,000 or 100,000 to create something around some of their innovation ideas, there was a lot of gap. And typically what they would then do was go to a lot of startups and say, hey, you know what, I want to build something in a mobile or cloud or something else. Now, expect that some of these startups have that capability, right? And I personally used to work with a lot of startups here in UK and also some in India. And the other gap we saw was that a lot of these startups would kind of create products or solutions for organizations, assuming that because it's technically very sound, it is something the clients would want to use. And what we then also saw was many of these clients would kind of look at these products and say that it's not necessarily the same way we operate as an organization, right? So with that as a background, I'll jump into, or continue from where Jaideep finished. So clearly, I think we spoke that, frugal innovation, simply put is how do you really do more and better with less, right? And that's, I think, very important. If you were to kind of link back to my background and the story I shared, right? A lot of large tech companies or vendors clearly know how to make programs work if there is a lot of resources available, right? A large corporate or a large government could go to an Accenture or any of these service companies and say, I have, let's say, 1 million, 10 million, and I want to run this large program. They have the entire methodologies and processes in place, right? But then how do you really try to do something meaningful when the budgets are not even just half, but maybe 1/10 that, right? So if you have a budget of, let's say, 50,000, how do you really try to get somewhere meaningful with that? And that's where I think we came in connect with Jaideep and started to kind of take the concepts from what he's been approaching to say that how do you, in an enterprise context, using technology, do more and better with less, right? And when I say less, substantially less. And of course, the examples Jaideep gave from how people have created these, Mitti Cool in India, etc. I think those are huge, reference point for us to work with, right? So we started on that, and then we started to reach out to corporates. And when we started Ignitho, we were a team of about 5-6 guys. All of us have been in the IT services space, help a lot of large enterprises with a lot of these programs and solutions, right? And what we quickly realized was that within the organization, it was never a problem of lack of ideas, right? And I'm sure all of you would also look back in your own organizations. Every now and then you wake up and say, okay, so you look at your mobile, you have so many nice working consumer apps, right? So whether it is trying to use a Uber or trying to sell something on eBay, everything is a lot more easier to use. And then you look at your organization, whether it's a corporate entity or a government entity, and you'll see that, okay, this system is like really, kind of way behind in terms of what's possible with what technology is coming through, right? So we started to kind of reach out to clients and say, okay, so if you have the ideas, right, and if there was a way to kind of help the idea to be built into something that you can take back to the business, right? Because typically if you say, okay, there is a mobile app that will solve all the problem, one would want to kind of take a mobile app, see how it works, and that's where you start to see the potential with what it can achieve, right? And the other thing we also said was, because there is a lot of ideas, the problem typically also then becomes is that how do you select the right idea, right? And what we also then saw was there are many organizations which were trying to kind of put a certain amount of budget, because if you are spending, let's say 50, 100K for a particular idea, right, 1 million could straight away give you about 10 to 20 ideas, right? And if some of it fails, it was still okay. And that kind of helped us to work with these corporates to kind of start to create something, right? And that's where I think, we started to kind of come in to say, we can really take ideas to kind of innovation. And I think there is always this confusion, or I'm sure a lot of you heard this, to say that, is innovation the same as invention? Or if you have ideas, does that make you innovative, right? And the clear example here we want to showcase is that if to be really innovative, we really need to start to do something. And as you start to do something and show some early success, that really becomes the start of the journey for you, right? Now, we continued on this. We started to do work with a few clients here in UK and some in the US. And over the last 3-4 years, we started to kind of pick up certain trends, right? Again, building from where Jaideep left off to say that, so they saw a lot of trends at a macro level. This is very much making it very micro to say that within organizations trying to use technology to kind of really make innovation happen, what are some of the things that we started to see, right? So the first of the points was, what I covered earlier. Clearly, there is enough and more ideas sitting there. Even there are today software available to kind of, excite the organization team members to contribute ideas, right? But then, of course, you can't really pick all the ideas and then progress them into something that you want to create, right? So clearly, there is that angle around how do you really take ideas into, production. Next was to kind of say that, okay, so eventually, let's say you are within an organization or a, governmental setup. Now you feel that, okay, for this particular area, we could create a, solution. Now, how do you justify the business case around that, right? Because eventually, if you are within an organization setup, everything needs to kind of, make sense from a business standpoint, right? People are not just going to do it for the sake of doing, right? So how do you kind of justify that was the second issue we started to notice. The third was kind of around saying that eventually if everybody starts to contribute ideas within organizations, right, there is always going to be that push and pull to say that, okay, why is my idea not selected versus someone else's idea, right? So who plays that referee within organizations or ecosystems to kind of agree to say that, okay, if there are 20 ideas, because the risk with a model like that is that, let's say there are 20 ideas, you took only 4 or 5 to the next stage. The guys who contributed those remaining 10 would say that my idea is not good, so that's it, I'm not going to contribute anymore, right? The other point we saw was, typically, like I said earlier as well, nobody wants to really put a lot of money into an idea in the early stage, right? Because I'm sure all of you also heard about a lot of stories wherein very large consultancy companies walk in and talk about large transformation programs and create a 3-year, 5-year plan, and you do all of this and then suddenly everything will transform, right? Today, I think there is a fatigue within organizations and enterprises to say that I really don't have the time to wait for the next 2 years, 3 years to kind of get to some kind of a result. I want to start to see something early on, right? And last but not the least, all ideas may not necessarily be core to the business operations, but it could actually make a huge impact when implemented, right? And I'll again cover some examples, and we'll have some of the speakers in the second half talk about some real life examples of how they have kind of progressed some of these ideas which initially look like not core to them, right? For example, if you're a bank, one would imagine that the core area to innovate is your banking transactions. If you're an airline, one would imagine that passenger transactions are the core area to innovate. But then one would be very surprised to know that some of the best ideas could actually be sitting within the non-core areas, right? So this is the initial set of areas that we started to see, and that's where we started to kind of support enterprises with. So how do we approach this, right? So within Ignitho, we kind of try to partner with organizations under 2 umbrellas. One is what we call as helping them with innovation services, right? So we don't claim to walk into any organization and say that, hey, you know what, we understand your business, so we will help you create those ideas. We always look at the organization to come forward with the ideas, right? So we are not the ideas guys. We walk in and say that if you have ideas, especially ideas that has been lying around because of lack of budget, give it to us, right? And what we then do is we take those ideas, and from our learnings of the past of having done large IT transformation, we bring those concepts into a much smaller scale. So quick 1 month, 3 months kind of time frame, we are able to kind of build some sort of prototype and showcase it back to the business. That's what sits under our innovation services. We also kind of do what's called as an innovation lab. Clearly, I think what we have tried to do is move away from the concept of a physical lab, right? Because today, I think everybody says, okay, let's do innovation, spend a lot of money, create a very fancy space, and then everyone is sitting around and figuring out what to do with this, right? You walk into a lot of these labs, you would see VR headsets, you would see, some sort of a display, and then, but clearly that's not really innovation. What we try to do within that is trying to build together a team of people to kind of, help them to, progress on the ideas. To say that, okay, so as a business, you might have a certain idea. We have the technology know-how. How do we come together to try some initial, prototypes around it, right? I'll also talk about partnerships here, because eventually we are a small company. We can't claim to know everything under the space of technology. That's where we partner with a lot of innovation ecosystems. One such is the Sussex Innovation Center. Again, you'll hear a bit about that in the second half. How innovations, ecosystems like the Sussex Innovation kind of work with startups and tech folks to kind of bring all this together to eventually still deliver on innovation in a frugal manner, right? The last point around that is, as we started to help a lot of enterprises with these kind of frugal innovation stuff, one thing that clients started to ask back to us is to say, we have developed a solution, they like it. Now, clearly the management is not agreeing to progress it to the next level, right? So as an example, I'll cover that in a bit more detail. So we're working with a large airport here in UK. So they wanted to develop something that could really speed up the aircraft turnaround times at airport, right? So, we created the solution. They started to use it at a, pilot level, and they were very happy. Now, to develop that into a full-blown solution would mean it had to have a much bigger budget. And the airport management said that's clearly not a core area for them. So they were not happy to put the money in, right? But then they kind of came back to us and said, saying that something like this is what, a lot of airports across the world would need. So we are happy to introduce you to 40 other airports. would you then sell this to 40 of those airports and such a way that you have economies of scale, we get to continue to use the solution at whatever is the fraction of the cost, right? And that's where we have created what we are calling now as Ignitho Ventures, right? So it comes from the word nurturing innovation, wherein we are kind of trying to build these product companies under the umbrella of Ignitho Ventures, right? So that's the kind of concept under which we are working. I'll talk 2-3 examples of what we have done, because it's all easy to say this is how it will all happen, but I think, clearly to showcase some success stories would kind of give you a sense on what is that we have been able to do, right? The first example I have is, work we did with a large, distribution company. So unfortunately, they went belly up. So a company called Palmer and Harvey and P&H, right? So been around for a fairly long time, and a lot of their systems were still kind of legacy, and they wanted to kind of really start to become, new age and get into the new economy, right? And the way we approached it is very much, so I'm sure some of you have heard the term digital transformation, right? To say that, okay, this company has been stuck in time, let's just introduce digital technology and then transform and, a few million, dollars of budget, and 3 years, 4 years, everything changes, right? But our approach has been very similar to the way you eat a watermelon, right? So you don't really take a watermelon and just eat it all together, right? You really cut it into small pieces and start to eat it. And as you start to eat it over time, you realize that you finished the watermelon, right? So exactly the same model is what we approach there. Instead of trying to transform the whole organization to say, over the next 2-3 years, every system in the company is going to be new age and you'll have the sexy, cool, mobile apps, etc. We started to pick one area at a time. So for P&H, we initially saw that the HR function or the HR area would be something that would create a lot of impact, because people who would go online to book a leave or even get their salaries paid, salary slips, all of that I think was still very much letter based or sometimes emails, etc. So we then created a portal for them, and because that initial small project we did created so much of an impact, the CEO himself was very keen to then start to use that as a platform to communicate to the entire large employee workforce about a lot of the changes that are coming towards the organization. Again, an example of, instead of trying to say, okay, let's create a budget of 10 million to do digital transformation, we started this project for about 50K, delivered the result, and the next one, and so on and so forth. So an example of how we tried to do innovation in a frugal way and show results. The second example, I would actually kind of hold on for post-lunch, because we have David Lane from the Arcus group. So they are part of the Sainsbury's group. And so he will talk a bit about how Ignitho has worked with the Arcus group to kind of create some of these frugal innovation solutions which have started to show success within the business, right? So I'll not steal his thunder, let you hear it directly from him how a business has gone about doing it. I spoke briefly about how we are working with the airport. So this is with the Gatwick Airport, where we are working with them to kind of pick up a lot of their small ideas. As I said earlier, today within a lot of enterprises, there are a lot of people with ideas sitting around. Like I said, a lot of them have used or continue to use mobile phones with apps like Uber, etc. And then they see within their organization, those things are not there. So within Gatwick Airport, what we have done is that we have kind of agreed to a threshold of what could be a financial model. So anything between 30 to 50K, we take it up, we take an idea, create some prototypes, showcase it back to the business. And of course, some of this they would say that, oh, as an idea, it really looked like something that could make a big impact. But as they start to take it and trial it out, they say that clearly this is not making an impact, compared to some where they thought it was a low impact one. When they try it out with a small group, when they see that it's making a tremendous amount of impact, and that's kind of completely accelerate this to the next phase, right? So some examples, again, like I said, you will hear a bit more from David post-lunch about, a bit more in detail about how we approach some of this. So in conclusion, right, like I said, my background, my co-founders, all of them have come from very large IT services companies, right? And one question most of us used to get asked was saying that, is this really possible? can you really create something meaningful in a 30, 40K budget, right? Because many of us have also been used to large budgets, and if it was 30, 40K, would it even make commercial sense to make that travel to meet the client, right? So, but I can assure you today that frugal innovation is happening. It's happening in enterprises. There are enough and more examples we ourselves have seen, and we are not the only company which is trying to support frugal innovation for enterprises and organizations, right? Second one is, there is a way in which you can approach it, because many people get stuck at idea stage. So there are a lot of ideas, people try to do small things, and then eventually they don't see results and say that this thing doesn't work, right? So there is a certain way in which one needs to approach to frugal innovation. I hopefully covered a bit about it, and in the second half you'll see a bit about that again. I hopefully covered a bit about some of the success stories. There is many more success stories that are there that we are doing and continue to do. I'm happy to share this during the breaks if it's of interest to anyone, right? So that's my presentation. Thank you for your time.